Here in this auditorium, we all understand that human life is, in some sense, sacred, and that taking a life is wrong. But what if in certain medical circumstances, it wasn't wrong at all, but merciful instead? Let me ask you, if your spouse or your parent or your grandparent developed a disease that brought enduring, intolerable suffering, do you think that your loved one should be able to ask for medical help to end his or her life? These are the questions that the Supreme Court of Canada, Canada's highest court, was called upon to answer in the Death with Dignity case of Gloria Taylor. And the court released its landmark decision in February of 2015. And now Canada has joined the growing list of nations that agree that if a person's life-ending suffering becomes so unbearable, that person should have the right to a peaceful death with the assistance of a doctor. Now, you might be thinking, this might sound like a morbid story, but it really isn't. I want to share with you today how Canada's experience can encourage and give hope to other nations that want to give critically ill adults the compassionate option of physician-assisted dying. And by the way, there are some religious groups and some other groups that oppose physician-assisted dying and are already working to roll back the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. And I'll tell you what you can do to make sure that doesn't happen. I'd like to begin with my personal story of Gloria. And I'll tell you, as soon as I met her, I wanted to help her. The year is 2011. Gloria phones me at the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association. I'm one of the lawyers on a legal team working on this issue. Over the phone, her voice is strong and clear. The reality is Gloria's very sick. I meet Gloria at her home in West Kelowna, British Columbia. She greets me with a warm hug and invites me to join her family for dinner. Her two sons, her 11-year-old granddaughter, Gabby, and two of her sisters and their husbands. And it's a boisterous crowd. Gloria gives little Gabby rides on her electric wheelchair. There's roast turkey and pierogies that Gloria has made from a family recipe. Before dinner, Gloria shows me pictures of her much-loved Harley-Davidson Super Glide motorcycle. Gloria had the bike custom painted in purple because that's her favorite color, and detailed with unicorns and flying doves. In her younger days, Gloria had traveled thousands of miles on that bike. Now, Gloria knows her days of riding motorcycles are over. What she doesn't know is how many more family dinners she'll have. 2 years earlier, at age 61, Gloria was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a progressive condition with no cure. ALS weakens muscles until paralysis sets in. And the doctor told her that ALS often paralyzes the muscles that control breathing. Gloria became alarmed that as her breathing deteriorated, she would gasp and suffocate for air like a fish out of water. Knowing that her condition was never going to stabilize, it was just going to get worse and worse, filled her with dread. But despite all that, Gloria founded a support group for people living with ALS. She learned to use a respiratory ventilator and she continued to live at home, independently, with the help of caregivers. Now, Gloria she was a woman of faith, and she believed that God did not want her to suffer, especially at the end. If her suffering became unbearable, she wanted a choice. She didn't want to die in a struggle with pain. She wanted a peaceful and a dignified death at home, embraced by her family and friends. Was that too much for Gloria to ask? Yes, it was. Back in 2011, a doctor who helped her could go to jail. It was against the law. However, after a 4-year legal struggle, on February 6, 2015, the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association won an historic victory on behalf of Gloria and all Canadians who need a choice at the end of life. On that day, the Supreme Court of Canada unanimously ruled that seriously and incurably ill Canadians who are suffering unbearably at the end of life do have the right to seek a compassionate death with the assistance of a doctor. The court recognized that a growing number of jurisdictions around the world permit physician-assisted dying. Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Colombia. In the United States, the states of Oregon, Washington, Montana, New Mexico, and Vermont permit aid in dying, with more legislation pending. Death with dignity is becoming a global movement. More important, a global conversation. In the jurisdictions that permit this humane option, strict limits are placed on who can access the laws. The laws have layers of safeguards to ensure that an individual is competent and protected against any coercion. Now, this is an argument you often hear. Dying people will be coerced to end their lives. This isn't true, and it never was. In fact, in most jurisdictions, 2 or more doctors are required to examine the patient, review the medical file, and ensure that that individual is fully informed and acting voluntarily. Often government agencies or expert review panels monitor compliance with the laws. There's a growing consensus that physician-assisted dying is a medical treatment. It's one of many compassionate end-of-life healthcare options that should be available to critically ill individuals. Now, as lawmakers and courts around the world examine this issue, they should look to the decades of data collected in jurisdictions that permit physician-assisted dying. The research shows, and this may surprise you, the research shows that physician-assisted dying is rarely accessed or used, and when it is, the laws have been safely and responsibly carried out. Now, here's why this conversation matters. The experience of these countries and states affirms 3 principles that matter deeply to those with serious medical conditions: compassion, protection, and respect. Compassion is by far the most important principle. Let me take you back to 2011 when Gloria introduces me to her good friend, Peter. Peter is a retired logger. He's an outdoorsman, and he's a devoted family man. Peter also suffers from ALS. All his life, he's been fit and strong. This is what he looks like just 1 year later. his appetite is gone. He can no longer eat solid foods. He's afraid he'll choke. The muscles that hold his organs in place have deteriorated. And he tells me that he often experiences pain as his organs press and shift against his spine. In his final months, Peter's suffering becomes unbearable. He begs his wife, Grace, his wife of 42 years, to shoot him or strangle him with a rope. Peter died the type of death Gloria most feared. He suffered a slow, excruciating march to death. He gasped and choked for air as though drowning. Doctors sedated Peter to the point of semi-consciousness. But even with the drugs, Peter suffered to the end, while Grace and their 2 daughters watched in their own agony. The Supreme Court of Canada recognized that no one should be forced to suffer such a cruel death. When all else fails, when medical treatments, pain management, comfort care, hospice care are no longer able to relieve extreme suffering, people like Peter will now have the option to die painlessly and with compassion. Finally. The second principle is protection. Now, the previous criminal laws had the unwanted effect of forcing some critically ill individuals to take their own lives prematurely. Now, why would they do that? Because they were afraid if they waited too long, they might actually become trapped in their bodies, trapped in an unbearable dying process, and they would no longer be physically capable of ending their life. How can laws that are meant to prolong life or save lives actually end up killing people? Well, let me explain by telling you about Nagy. The year is 2012. Nagy has Huntington's disease. It's a fatal degenerative disease of the brain. He inherited that disease from his father. Now, Nagy is a successful entrepreneur. He developed a career in food retailing, and at one point he ran a specialty cheese shop in Toronto. Nagy is married to Jan, a college professor, and the love of his life. When Nagy begins to experience the serious symptoms of the disease, he decides he's going to live on his own terms, even if that means taking his own life. Now, don't get me wrong, Nagy has good years left, but he worries if he waits too long, he'll become physically and mentally incapable of taking his own life. He already experiences involuntary jerking and writhing movements. He can no longer walk. He has difficulty swallowing and making his speech intelligible. Now, Nagy is not suicidal. He loves life. But he can feel, as he puts it, the wheels coming off the bus. His greatest fear is that he'll end up like his father, who died an agonizing death from the same disease. At the end, his father had to be tied to his hospital bed. He was mentally vacant, unable to communicate, completely dependent on others for his care. To escape his father's fate, Nagy considers jumping in front of a subway. He thinks about hanging himself. In the end, he decides that he'll overdose on pills. When that day came, sunlight streamed through the home of Nagy and Jan. But the sad reality was Nagy couldn't have his beloved wife by his side for fear she would be criminally prosecuted. That was Nagy's ending. It was not the end for Jan. The police commenced a 4-month homicide investigation, effectively denying Jan the chance to peacefully grieve for her husband. The Supreme Court of Canada determined that a regulated system of safeguards would be the best protection for Canadians and would prevent people like Nagy, would save people like Nagy from taking their own lives too soon. Now, let me repeat this. The Supreme Court of Canada's decision only applies to individuals who have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. That means no chance of recovery or an acceptable cure. The individual must clearly request life-ending assistance, and the ruling only applies to critically ill adults whose suffering is enduring and intolerable. The third principle is respect. That is, respecting an individual's fundamental right to make deeply personal choices based on his or her own values and beliefs. There are many ways to die with dignity. The Supreme Court of Canada's decision recognizes that critically ill adults should be able to make the choices that are right for them. Let's return to Gloria. Gloria deeply respected those who would have made a different decision if they were in her shoes. She didn't want to die, but the disease was ending her life in dreadful circumstances. Gloria wanted to be able to decide how much suffering to endure and how to say goodbye. Unfortunately, Gloria didn't live to see the court's decision, but she did get part of her wish. She died quickly and painlessly of an infection, surrounded by the people she loved. In the countries and states that allow physician-assisted dying, patients report that simply knowing they have that choice, even if they never need it, brings peace of mind in their final days. So what does the right to die with dignity mean for you and your family? Well, in Canada, that partly depends on what happens next. The Supreme Court of Canada has given Parliament and the provincial legislatures 12 months to enact legislative guidelines upholding the right of Canadians to die with dignity. They have until February 6th, 2016. Now, as I mentioned before, some religious groups and other groups oppose physician-assisted dying under any circumstances. And these groups are already lobbying for restrictive laws that would create so many barriers that accessing physician-assisted dying would be effectively impossible for the Canadians who want it and need it. If you believe that the Canadians have the right to die with their personal dignity, there are two important things you can do. First, contact your federal and your provincial lawmakers. Let them know that you care deeply about this issue and that you expect any new legislation to honor the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. Second, go public. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper. Join the conversation on social media. Make your voice heard. Together, we can ensure that critically ill Canadians are given the compassion, the protection, and the respect that they deserve, that we all deserve.